Indeed, the greatest issue before our country is whether Britain is to remain a free, independent nation-state, or whether we are to be dissolved in a federal Europe. There are no half measures, there are no third ways, and there are no second choices. My friends, too many powers have already passed from our Parliament to the bureaucracy in Brussels. We must get them back, and above all, we must keep the pound. Keeping our currency is not, as Labour would have it, just a matter of economics, though the economic case grows weaker as the euro grows sicker by the day. Now, a country which loses the power to issue its own currency is a country which has given up the power to govern itself. Such a country would no longer be free, and it would no longer be truly democratic, for its people could no longer determine their own future in national elections. My friends, to surrender the pound, to surrender our power to self-government, would betray all that past generations down the ages lived and died to defend. It would also be to turn our back on America, leader of the English-speaking peoples of the world, to whom Europe, let's remember, also owes its freedom. That is not our way.
I'm not sure what is meant by those who say that the party should return to something called one-nation conservatism. As far as I can tell, by their views on European federalism, such people's creed would be better described as no-nation conservatism. The activity of the European Court, which can only ultimately be checked by amending the European Communities Act itself, is increasingly undermining our judicial system and the sovereignty of our Parliament. Proposals are being made for common European defence, proposals which Michael Portillo has roundly and rightly attacked. They, too, are a threat to national independence. But most important, of course, is the proposed single European currency, which, as John Redwood has argued, would be a major step on the way to a single European nation. Vital as the issue of self-government is, it is limited government that concerns me today. For the European Union not only wishes to take away our powers, it wishes to increase its own. It wants to regulate our industries and labour markets, pontificate over our tastes, in short, to determine our lives. The Maastricht Treaty, which established a common European citizenship and greatly expanded the remit of the European Commission, shows the outlines of the bureaucratic superstate which is envisaged. And Maastricht is the beginning, not the end, of that process.
Let me take Europe first. As someone who believes in Britain, in our identity and our institutions, our history and our destiny, I reject the notion that we should effectively cease to govern ourselves and pass more and more powers over to European institutions and non-elected bureaucracies. I also take this opportunity to warn the people of the United States, as I have done on other occasions, that the agenda which the European federalists have set can't be pursued without damaging American interests and ultimately jeopardizing harmonious international relations. It is only by staying united that the West, that is America and Europe together, can ensure that we are the dominant influence in global affairs. And that matters because we are the authors and spreaders of liberty and the rule of law. And that must be our goal. The European federalists, who still find much support among European politicians, though less among European peoples, aim to create a United States of Europe with its own government, currency, foreign policy and defence forces, which can only be and is intended to be a rival to the United States. I don't believe you can create one nation from 15 different countries with 15 different histories and 13 different languages.
Let me say at the outset, of course we must stay in the European Union. I know of no sensible person who believes otherwise. And I say, without a shadow of doubt in my mind, that the wrong outcome on June the 23rd will affect our union and will jeopardize that unity. Because the plain, uncomfortable truth is that the unity of the United Kingdom itself is on the ballot paper in 2 weeks' time. We met the families of the victims. So I believe that it would be an historic mistake to do anything that has any risk of destabilizing the complicated and multi-layered constitutional settlement that underpins the present stability in Northern Ireland. But that is what a British exit from the European Union would do. It would throw all the pieces of the constitutional jigsaw up into the air again, and no one could be certain where they might land. Of the British people. And we're in no doubt about that. Not just a shrunken economy, not just a diminished United Kingdom on the world stage, both of these most certainly, but not just that. A smaller country in a very real and a very literal sense. The most successful union in world history would be broken apart for good. Now that appalling outcome could follow the wrong choice on the 23rd of June. It improves the living standards of the British people. So throw away the membership of Europe, and don't be surprised if, in the end, as a consequence, we accidentally throw away our union as well.
If Europe defaulted to Euroscepticism, or if European nations, faced with the immense challenge we have in front of us, decided to huddle together, hoping we can avoid globalization, shrink away from confronting the changes around us, take refuge in the present policies of Europe as if by constantly repeating them, we would, by the very act of repetition, make them more relevant, then we risk failure, and failure on a grand strategic scale. The issue, therefore, is not about the idea of the European Union. It is about modernization. It is about policy. It is not a debate about how to abandon Europe, but how to make it do what it was set up to do: improve the lives of people. But the purpose of political leadership, if we stop enlargement or shut out its natural consequences, it wouldn't, in the end, save one job, keep one firm in business, prevent one delocalization. For a time, it might, but not for long. And in the meantime, Europe would become more narrow, more introspective, and those who garner support will be those not in the traditions of European idealism, but in the traditions of outdated nationalism and xenophobia.
Well, when you look at the polls, you know, they're pretty evenly matched, Remain or Leave. But my best instinct about this is that the country will do the sensible thing and stay in the European Union, because if we were to leave, it would put a level of economic risk and insecurity into the ordinary family household that I think most people would think is a foolish risk to take. So I believe we will stay, but I have to say, you know, I look at politics around the world today and it's in an unpredictable state.
When the President of the United States, President Obama, spoke in the UK recently, it seemed like he swayed things in towards the stay camp. Perhaps just a little bit, moving the needle a little bit. Why do you think that is? Why did his words have such impact?
Because, I mean, if you're rational, the view of the President of the most powerful country in the world and our biggest ally should matter. So when someone like President Obama comes and you know, personally I think it's important we know his view and the strength of his view and says, look, we as your ally want you to stay because we want a Britain that's engaged with the world, then I think it does count. And remember, you know, the European Union is the market, the largest commercial market in the world. It's the biggest political union. We sell half of our goods into the European market. If we get out of Europe, the really crazy thing about this situation is we will then have to negotiate step by step our way back into the single market. So, you know, when you stack up the arguments, as you say, I mean, the rational side of the argument's very clear, and you've got to hope ultimately that whatever the emotions are, that people take a rational view of the interests of themselves, their families, and also the country.
There is no old Europe, no new Europe, no East or West Europe. There is only one Europe, and it is our home Europe. So I stand here, proud to be British and proud to be European, representing a country that does not see itself as an island adrift from Europe, but as a country at the centre of Europe, not in Europe's slipstream, but in Europe's mainstream. And that is why I am also proud that by a large majority our British Parliament ratified the Lisbon Treaty. And I believe that we in Europe are uniquely placed to lead the world in meeting the wholly new and momentous challenges of globalisation ahead. I want to discuss how we can build from a world which looks today unsustainable, unsafe and unequal, a truly global society which is sustainable for all, secure for all and fair to all.
And it's undoubtedly true, terrorism is now a cross-border operation. And if you're going to deal with a cross-border operation, you need cross-border coordination. And you cannot solve the problem of tackling both terrorism and the causes of terrorism unless you're prepared to act with your neighbours. What we need to do is show that we can manage globalisation and global change in the public interest, but at the same time we've got to respect people's love of national identity, and we've got to show how we can balance the autonomy that people want with the cooperation we need. And that's what the European Union is about. It's not some giant project for a federal superstate, but it's not a return, which is impossible, to 19th century views of sovereignty, which even America, the biggest superpower in the world, has left behind. There is one area where you need European cooperation, where we can't do anything without European cooperation, and that is dealing with the scandal of tax havens across the world, which we've now got to deal with. If Britain acted, we could not get the results that would close down the tax havens in other countries. But if Europe acts, 28 countries, the clout of Europe can do it. Instead of having the national sourcing of goods and services, we now have the global sourcing. And what it means is you cannot succeed in securing financial stability or dealing with pollution or dealing with growth and trade or inequality, any of the big problems now as a result of these global changes taking place without cooperation with your neighbours. And that is going to be the lesson that we have got to learn from this debate and this referendum, that the European Union is not the cause of the problem. But if you can get cooperation working, the European Union can be part of the solution to the problem.
Isolationism has never served this country well. Whenever we turn our back on Europe, sooner or later we come to regret it. We've always had to go back in, and always at a much higher cost. The international situation confronting Britain today means that the closest possible cooperation with our European neighbours isn't an optional extra. It is essential for this country's security and our ability to get things done in the world. We see a newly belligerent Russia, the rise of the Daesh network to our east and to our south, the migration crisis. Dealing with these requires unity of purpose in the West. We aren't any old country. We are a special country, one whose language, whose values, whose influence is felt the world over. If I felt that remaining in the European Union diminished us, I would recommend that we voted to leave. But it doesn't. It amplifies our power. When we're in these organizations, we become an even bigger force in the world, with a bigger influence in the world. And in the European Union, with 27 countries behind us, we can take a stronger lead in tackling climate change, fighting disease and poverty, standing up to Russian aggression, helping friends around the world in Southeast Asia, Australasia, the Caribbean. And we can promote and preserve the values we hold so dear, like democracy, like freedom, like tolerance. That's how our extraordinary country has always made its influence felt. Not by walking away from the world, but by engaging with it. Brits don't quit. We get involved, we take a lead, we make a difference, we get things done. If we left, our neighbours would go on meeting and making decisions that profoundly affect us, affect our country, affect our jobs, but we wouldn't be there. They would be making decisions about us, but without us.
Last year, the French used information exchanged through the Prüm Agreement to locate one of the suspected perpetrators of the November attacks in Paris. These are practical measures that promote effective cooperation between different European law enforcement organisations, and if we were not part of them, Britain would be less safe. Now, I know that some people say the EU does not make us more secure because it does not allow us to control our border. But that is not true. Free movement rules mean it is harder to control the volume of European immigration, and as I said yesterday, that is clearly no good thing. But they do not mean we cannot control the border. The fact that we are not part of Schengen, the group of countries without border checks, means we have avoided the worst of the migration crisis that has hit continental Europe over the last year. It means we can conduct checks on people travelling to Britain from elsewhere in Europe. And subject to certain rules and the availability of information, it means we can block entry for serious criminals and terrorists. Now, I've heard some people say, especially after the terrorist attacks in Brussels last month, that the very existence of extremists and terrorists in Belgium, France, and other EU member states is reason enough to leave. But our response to Paris and Brussels cannot be to say that we should have less cooperation with countries that are not only our allies, but our nearest neighbours. And anyway, leaving the EU would not mean we could just close ourselves off to the world. The 9/11 attacks on New York were planned in Afghanistan. The 7/7 attackers trained in Pakistan. And most of the international terrorism casework that crosses my desk involves countries beyond Europe's borders. So my judgment as Home Secretary is that remaining a member of the European Union means we will be more secure from crime and terrorism.